Hello, crafting friends. It's Doreen DeCebus from It Begins with Ink and Paper, and welcome to Simply Stamping Sunday. It is week 3 for the Perfectly Pears stamp set, and I can't wait to share with you what I have for tonight. So here is our stamp set. I'm using almost every single stamp from this set tonight, except for congratulations and thank you, but everything else we'll be using in the cards that we're going to be creating tonight. So I have 3 cards to create with you, and we are going to be using both the designer series paper and the stamps in those cards. Alright, so let's get started. Here is the first card that we are going to be making, and this is just one way that you can showcase the designer series paper with a greeting, and I did stamp the pears as well. Hi Ross, thanks for joining tonight. So let's talk about what you need for this. You are going to need a piece of the designer series paper that measures 3 3/4 by 5. We're going to be chopping it up in just a minute, and I just want to show you the back side of this paper. It's very delicate and pretty, and this side has more of the pears on it. You are also going to need a piece of 8.5 by 5.5 thick basic white cardstock, and let me just fold that right in the middle and burnish that edge. We'll set that aside. You're going to need a scrap of basic white cardstock to stamp the pears, and you're going to need a piece of, this measures 3/4 of an inch by 3.5. We won't need this whole thing, but I just wanted it to be a little bigger for the stamping. So let me just grab a scrap of basic white out of my little scrap pocket. There we go. And on this I am going to be stamping our pears. So like last week, I'm going to be using the same color combination tonight, and so we're going to be using Darling Duckling, which is one of the new in colors, Mossy Meadow, and we're also using Early Espresso. So I'm going to take the solid image, just going to move some of this out of the way so we can do our stamping. I'm going to take the solid image, and I'm going to first ink it up in Darling Duckling. And then I'm going to take a dauber and just put a little bit of the ink on it, and I'm just going to pounce it along the edges just to add some of that green. Then I'm going to huff on it and stamp. Oops, didn't get the bottom edge, so we're going to just stamp over that. There we go. So this is what it looks like. Close these up. And I'm going to grab my Early Espresso because the rest of the card is going to be stamped in that. So I'm going to use the little dots just to add some of that there. And then I am going to take our, let me just find the right stamp where it's at, the inside of our leaves. And I'm going to stamp just the top. And add that as a stem. And there we have our little pears. The next step is to cut them out, which I already did, and we have those right there. Okay, so I'll set aside my scrap paper, and I'm going to just clean my stamp, because as we continue to use it, we're not going to want to stamp it back into the ink pad with that green on it. There we go, and I'm going to take the brown off this as well. All right. Excuse me. For our greeting, we're going to use Hello Friend. I'm going to stamp Friend first, and this piece is too long, but that's okay. I'm going to be stamping it as close to the bottom as I can. Perfect, to leave room for the hello on top. That's wonderful. I am going to snip it at an angle, and then I'm going to add our pears. Just like that, and then I'm going to cut the head. So let me just add a little bit of adhesive, and we'll put this right onto the tag, and then I am just going to cut around this, and there's our tag. Okay, so now let's look at that piece of designer series paper. I can cut it any way that I would like to cut it. So you don't have to. You can look at the designer series paper and decide what you want. I want some of these flowers on the edge, so I think I'm going to go to 3.5. So this piece will be 3.5. This piece will be 1 1/4. And then I'm going to cut the top image. I'm going to cut the bottom image off, I guess, to keep those leaves intact. And then I am going to cut the pear off the top here. So it's going to be a little different than our piece that I showed you. But I look at the designer series paper to see how I want to cut it when it's time. All right, so let's bring this back over, and I am going to just place these on the front of the card before I put any of them down. And there we go. So let's start putting things in place. Just going to add some Stampin' Seal. We are under a thunderstorm alert, and we just had a bunch of rainfall. But the sky is clearing up, so maybe it's over for now. I was just hoping that we didn't end up losing our power tonight, especially in the middle of our broadcast. Hi, Barbara. Thanks for joining tonight. Okay, so we've got those two pieces on. I don't want to have much of a border between. I just want a little bit of white sticking through, and then so you can see that it all kind of connects. So there's the front of our card, and now we have this greeting. So on this greeting, I went down here to put my sentiment so that you could see all those beautiful pears. I could go here. I could go up here. I think I'm going to go right here. So we're going to grab some dimensionals. In New England yesterday was just a gorgeous, gorgeous summer day. All right, and there is our first card, all said and done. Very simple, letting the designer series paper take the lead. So let's move those out of the way, and we'll go with our next card, which looks like this. So we're using another design of the designer series paper, but we're also doing a little bit more stamping. So let's get out what we need for this card. This card has a lot of pieces. So we're using Petal Pink, we're using Old Olive, and of course we're using Basic White. So our Basic White measures 4 by 5 1/4. And then we have a smaller piece that measures 2 by 4. Our piece of Petal Pink measures 5 1/2 by 8 1/2. I picked all my colors tonight based on the designer series paper. So our designer series paper measures 4 by 2 3/4. And then I have a piece of Old Olive that I'm going to mount this on, and it is only bigger at the top. So this, it measures 4 by 3 7/8. So let's just attach that, because that's one of our first things we're going to be doing. Oops, I just want to make sure it's even and it's just a little off. So next week will be our last week with using Perfectly Pears, and I'll be doing fun folds like I do all the time on the last week. Okay, we're going to need to put this on first so that we know where to stamp. And that looks good. So if you have a request for next month's, let me know. And if I have it, I can see what I can do. Okay, that's down. So I'm going to be stamping a greeting on this. A good friend is a gift, and I want to go all the way over so I have enough room on the side for the card. And I'm going to use that Early Espresso ink. There we go. And then this is going to go on another piece of Old Olive, and the Old Olive measures 4 1/4, excuse me, not 4 1/4, 4 1/8 by 5 3/8. So just a little 1/16 of an inch around the card. There we go. And then this is going to go on to the front of the card. There we go. So we'll set that aside and bring out this piece of paper, and of course we're going to be stamping on this. Alright, so I'm going to start with the Mossy Meadow, and I'm going to start with my leaves first because I want my leaves to be towards the top. I don't want it to be too low. And so let's grab those, ink up the stamp, and add that. Then I can take the inside and I can add that to the inside of the leaves and the stem. There we go. Then we'll take our solid outline image. Well, it's an outline image, it's not solid, so the little trick for this is that there is a little space up at the top, and I don't know if you can see that, but it's where this is going to fit right over the stem. And then the stem can come down on that. Okay, now let's do the inside. So I'm going to start with inking the inside distinctive layer with the Darling Duckling. Then I'm going to grab my and just pounce a little bit of that green. I'm going to give it a little bit of a huff. Layer that on. And then we're going to add some of the early espresso. Little brown dots. And then, whoops, we still need that early espresso because I'm going to also stamp the hello. Now we're just going to add these so this is 2 by 4. This one is 2 1/8 by 4 1/8, and then the piece of Old Olive is 2 1/4 by 4 1/4. There we go. And before we put the inside in, I think what I'd like to add to the inside to kind of match some of that designer series paper are the flowers. So I'm going to stamp that in the corner of the inside, and then I will add some of the Darling Duckling on the inside of those flowers. There we go. Now we can finish putting the card together. So we're going to add some dimensionals on the back of this. And this is going to go right on the front. And then this piece will go on the inside of the card. And there is card number 2. All right, let's get to our third card. So this is what our third card looks like. I am using the Let's Celebrate from Sips and Cheers because I wanted a really small greeting for this. So let's look at how we made this. So what are you going to need? You are going to need a piece of basic white thick cardstock that measures 8.5 by 5.5, and I'm just going to burnish it in half and set this aside. You are going to need a piece of designer series paper. I'm using the same piece, it's just the design is on both sides, so we're going to be using that tonight. And I'm going to be adding this. This piece measures 4.25 by 5.5, so it measures exactly half of the piece of, totally covers the front of the star. I was about to say it's a quarter of the piece, but it'd be a quarter of the piece if it was regular cardstock. Okay, let's try that again and get it lined up as close as I can. This is probably for me the hardest part of using paper that is the same size as the card front, because you've got to line it up just right. And I've got a little tiny bit of an edge showing. So usually what I do when that happens is I just pull my trimmer out and trim that tiny little bit of the edge so that I don't have white showing. I could also, if I wanted to, I could also just take my ink pad and I could go right along the end and just ink it up so it is covered. But I just took that little tiny bit off the front. Alright, so there's part 1. Part 2 is taking this piece of designer series paper, which measures 4 7/8 by 3 5/8, and then this measures 3. Let me just go back. Measures 5 by 3 3/4, and then I'm just going to add this to the front. So I'm pulling out the early espresso from those stems that are on the designer series paper. Then I have a piece of the early espresso cardstock that measures 3/8 of an inch by 5 inches. So I'm just going to add adhesive right across that, and then this is going to go along the front, and it goes from the end to the end. So it's going to blend in right with that early espresso. And then this is just going to go on the front of the card. So this will set up our card. Okay, let's set that aside. We're going to need to take out that scrap piece of paper again and my black ink pad. And we're going to need 3 of these to fussy cut. So there's 1, 2, 3. And I need a 4th. Let me just get the inside of my card. There we go. All right. Put that aside for a moment. And we're going to get out our Darling Duckling ink, which is one of the new in colors, and we're going to stamp the centers in the flowers. There we go. And then we just need to fussy cut them out, which I've done. All right, so the next part is probably going to be the hardest part, is stamping that little tiny greeting on this piece of paper. This is 1/4 of an inch, so there's not a lot of room. That's why I wanted this little stamp. And it's, I cut it 3 inches long, but we don't need that much of it. So you can see how it just fits in there. Okay, our stamping is done, except did I stamp the inside? I don't think I did, so we have 1 more bit of stamping left. Let me get that inside again. There we go. Now our stamping is all done. So what I'm going to do is take 2 of these, and I'm just going to put them above and below the line with just a little bit of the Stampin' Seal. There we go. And now I'm going to take, excuse me, the second one and do the same. And I'm just going to fit those flowers together like that. Now I'm going to just put a little adhesive there, and I am going to attach it to this. I'm going to trim off the edge, and then I'm going to just trim around where the flowers are, like I did before. And I'm going to use dimensionals, and I'm going to put it on so that this piece is centered on our our early espresso piece. So I'm going to start with putting on some mini dimensionals. And then I'll use some regular ones. There we go. This was the other reason I wanted to use a little stamp, because I wanted this piece of white to sit right on top of the early espresso. So let's add this. And there's our third card. So let's bring out all 3 cards from tonight. Make some room. So we started with this card, went on to this card, and then we finished with this card. So which one is your favorite? I think I like this one. I just like the simplicity of it and how this turned out here. But I like them all. They're all cute. So we have one more week of Perfectly Pears. That'll be next Sunday night, 6 o'clock, and we'll be doing fun folds. Remember what I said at the beginning? Comment if you think of a stamp set you'd like me to use for the month of August. If I don't hear anything this week, then I will put some choices in next Sunday night for you to choose. And I will be back Friday night, of course, for Fun Fold Friday. So have a wonderful week, everyone. Good night. Bye-bye.